Okay, so you've managed now, through your experience in The Hague recently, to be able to take to task, if we could put it that way, 3 members of Dutch Shell, yes? 2 members of Dutch Shell and the Environment Minister, yeah? Is that correct?
The Climate Minister, yeah.
Right. And as I know you've already started the process, do you think that'll take a long time to gather the material, or is...
Actually, by opening up a case file, an independent preliminary examination into climate ecocide, what we're doing is we're predominantly relying on existing evidence. So a lot of the back-end evidential research has been undertaken over a period of about 8 years by a number of organisations, Climate Accountability Institute being a really key one here. They brought out a summary report called Smoke and Fumes. That report's very important because it builds on earlier research that was undertaken into the carbon majors. And the carbon majors identified the top companies in the world that are causing the most amount of harm. Statistics change slightly, but the most up-to-date one establishes that 100 companies in the world are generating over 70% of carbon emissions.
Right.
So, and one of those top companies is Shell.
Yeah.
It kind of moves up and down within the top 10 region. So that's why we're looking at Shell in terms of corporate accountability for climate ecocide. But also we were very interested, and we continue to be very interested, in state responsibility, the failure of a state to actually stop a corporation that is causing such serious harm. Climate ecocide is, in some senses, it sounds very abstract.
It's a kind of byproduct of
dangerous industrial activity, if you like, yes, because you're looking at the consequences that arise out of the generation and release of excess carbon emissions. It's less tangible than, say, for instance, genocide. Genocide, you have a whole load of dead bodies on your hands. That's not to negate the seriousness of genocide, but what we're dealing with is very much 21st century crime here, which requires new parameters. So by opening up an investigation, a preliminary examination of Shell's activities, what we want to do is see whether or not it fits within the existing international crime matrix, if you like, whether or not it could be prosecuted as a crime against humanity. We think not. However, we're examining that. And if not, then it doesn't require new crime, that being ecocide crime.
There are laws against pollution, are there not?
Yes, but
to some degree.
They're very limited in remit, and they tend to be what's known as second-tier legislation.
Right.
So it's civil litigation on the whole. So it tends to be that local population that's adversely impacted by immediate source of pollution, water is a very obvious one, then sues the company. It means that the state can bypass its responsibilities. It doesn't have any involvement in the process. Use the individual, use the community have to sue. And of course, it's the kind of epic David and Goliath story where small community with little access to funding or lawyers tries to take on big transnational corporation who can throw a lot of money on it and allow it to trawl through the courts, the civil courts, for sometimes over a decade. And what little payment there is, if they do succeed, is often too little too late. The consequences are often far more long-term, long-lasting. So that's very unsatisfactory.
Right.
And that's why we say that there's missing international crime here. That, ironically, one of the biggest international crimes of our time, climate ecocide, where we're putting the threat of injury and loss of life to millions, if not billions, of people on the planet as a whole, is just simply not being able to be addressed through existing international criminal laws.
In time, ecocide will become a law.
Yes.
This is
Yes, it will.
kind of inevitable.
Absolutely.
What would you see as being a suitable punishment? I mean, is it just finance or is it reparation?
So, first of all, criminal law has a far wider spectrum of what it can do in terms of remedies. Punishment is actually just one part of it. When you sue a company, you are very limited in what you can claw back, and it tends to be just a fine. But with criminal law, because it attaches itself to individuals, you're looking at whether or not society at large has to be protected by actually enforcement of a prison sentence against individuals, because what they're doing is so dangerous at large. For instance, mass murderer, murder, a person, an individual will be locked up. It's not so much about punishment, it's also about protection of society at large. So we're dealing with protection here. It's also about how do you make good the damage that has been caused.
Yeah.
So courts can have recourse to actually making orders, and in some countries this has already been implemented, called restorative justice, against companies to make good the harm that they have caused. But also courts then have the power to close down the companies so that they can no longer operate. Because remember, if it's a criminal activity, it's unlawful and therefore cannot continue. So this is very important, but there's an added layer to it, especially with international criminal law, and it's preventative. By making something a crime, you're actually preventing most of it from continuing to occur, because those companies will then have to, by law, change their operations to ensure that whatever they are doing is no longer a criminal activity. So it's far wider than just punishment. You're looking at protecting society at large, you're looking at restorative justice, and you're looking at preemptive and preventative measures.
Well, also, ultimately, to change the attitude around behaviour.
Yes, what it actually does is it creates a legal framework where it becomes the exception rather than it being the normative. Because it's now prohibited. And nothing changes things faster than prohibiting. For instance,
to not wear
it is now
seatbelt.
Prohibited to drive a car without wearing your seatbelt.
Yes.
Now, when that was brought in, virtually overnight, that just became the new acceptable standard.
Yes,
It became the new normative.
Yes.
And often what happens is once you criminalise something, very quickly does everything adjust.
Yes.
Whether or not you're talking business, finance,
drink driving,
public perception of what's acceptable. Drink driving is a very good example.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is a company operating in the Northern Hemisphere, call it Shell if you like, any of the big the majors, oil companies, whatever, are they going to be able to relate to sea level rise in the South Pacific?
One of the pieces of research that really concerned us actually touched on this point. The Center for International Environmental Law in the United States, who undertook the Smoke and Fumes report, identified as part of their evidence not just that the fossil fuel companies, and we're not just talking one fossil fuel company, we're talking about an industry at large, were being informed by their own climate scientists, certainly by the mid-1980s, late 1980s, that their activities were so dangerous that they are facilitating climate collapse. The writing was on the wall. That's what's very important here.
Okay.
And one of the responses to that, to the knowledge that, amongst other things, it would exacerbate rising sea levels, was for certain companies to actually raise the level of their oil rigs to accommodate sea level rises.
Oh yeah.
So
that was their solution.
Yeah, not only was there knowledge, but there was a direct acceptance of, well, we'll have to accommodate that. But more than that, what the smoke and fumes report and the body of research demonstrates very clearly is that the industry as a whole decided to go on a counter-offensive designed to confuse the public at large on the issue of climate change to enable them to continue with business as usual. So what this all comes down to in law is the element of knowledge. Shell knew.
Yes.
The whole fossil fuel industry knew that their industry was contributing to climate collapse. It was just a matter of time. It's an inevitability. With that knowledge, then there was a very public disinformation campaign, so it seems from the evidence, put in place, designed specifically to keep the public confused on this issue, and not just the public and society, but also at political level, to enable business as usual to continue. Now, this is very concerning because all of this, when we're looking at climate collapse, is preventable. And it's preventable by actually stopping those industries that are the carbon majors that cause the most significant harm. Last year we have the IPCC report, which has been approved by every government in the world. And in that report it says that the ability to actually reduce our carbon emissions so that our temperature increases are capped at 1.5 degrees will require rapid and drastic emissions. At the moment we're on a trajectory to 4 degrees, and actually once you get past that you're on runaway climate collapse. To reduce from 4 degrees down to 1.5 degrees requires roughly a 70% decrease in carbon emissions. The Carbon Majors reports shows that 70% reduction in carbon emissions equates to stopping the whole of the fossil fuel industry. Without us stopping that,
as of now,
we are going to be in runaway climate change. This is preventable.
You think it's preventable?
It is if you make it a crime. You have to criminalise it.
But as you say, these things take time.
No, I don't say that. You say
Well,
that.
I mean, if you bring in a law, which makes it, you'd have to make it illegal to drive a car.
No. You have
You'd
all
have to
cars.
change the fuel of the car, or you...
Precisely. You change your cars. What your cars are run on.
Do you think you can change it that fast?
Well, yes, there's a guy down in Plymouth who can put a little box in the front of your car so that it runs on hydrogen.
Yeah, but he's not tooled up to...
Yes, but the reason he's not tooled up is because you have a government that's made it almost impossible for him to make it work commercially.
Yeah, that's gone for cars running on water.
Let me explain how law works. Law can take a very long time if you wish it to. Governments can drag their feet over it. Or you can pass emergency legislation overnight. Every government in the world has the power to pass emergency legislation overnight, and indeed does so. So, for instance, George Bush shored up Wall Street with emergency legislation at 3 o'clock in the morning. We've used it for terrorist legislation. It all depends on whether or not you consider this to be an emergency.
Well, exactly. So, do you think it's possible for people to take climate change so seriously that they bring in emergency legislation?
I don't know if we even need to do that. In fact, all it requires to make an amendment to the International Criminal Court's Rome Statute is for a country to propose it,
right,
and for it to be seconded, and it be tabled and then voted upon.
So that's what Vanuatu's doing. Is that what?
No, they're not doing that yet. I can't say that.
You can't
I can't
say
say
that,
that on camera. But Vanuatu is certainly engaging in
thinking about it.
Well, they're certainly engaging on the issue in a very serious way. Yeah.
But that's all it takes is one country, do you think, to table this motion?
It's not a motion, it's actually an amendment,
An
to
amendment.
possibly the most important international legal document we have in the world, which is the Rome Statute. Certainly there's a very big legal discourse happening around this, and has been behind the scenes for quite some time.
So if we are on the edge of emergency, why is it taking any country so long to step up to the plate?
Two reasons. Firstly, it depends on whether or not you're a Western state with vested interests.
Yes.
So, you have fossil fuel companies and what have you. Also, you're not adversely impacted by climate change, per se. Secondly, if you're the opposite,
Yes.
you're a small island developing state that's suffering terribly, you're on the front line of climate change, often you actually don't know that you have the opportunity to do this, because your finances are so restricted.
Yes.
Sending delegates to The Hague or to New York to attend the meetings for the International Criminal Court are just financially too much out of the remit of attending and engaging in these issues.
Is that where they would become informed about the possibility, or could they become informed in other ways about?
There are a number of ways that they
action?
can be informed, absolutely. This is absolutely right. And indeed, that's what I've been doing for the last 9 years.
Yeah.
It's only recently that we've actually put a campaign together with Mission Lifeforce to crowdfund for those delegates to attend.
Right.
But for the past 9 years, I've been going into meetings with delegates from those countries, with ministers and so on and so forth, to discuss the legal potential ramifications of them engaging on this issue.
And are you on your own?
Not anymore.
What about Balthazar?
Yes, well, I'm not going to be able to speak about that either, because I'm actually going over to Madrid next week.
Okay, all right. You can't talk about him.
No, until things have to happen, and then it'll become public, and we'll choose.
But I mean, when you all right, so you can go to various meetings, you can go to various countries.
Yeah.
But are you essentially a one-woman show?
No. So I have a raft of organisations and lawyers and judges, former judges and attorney generals around the world who gift their services for free to come on board to assist at key critical points and meetings in different junctures. So, for instance, the annual assembly for the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, I will bring together various individuals to come forward and make representations. For instance, when we have meetings with representatives of the small island developing states in different countries,
Yeah.
I will bring together other lawyers and scientific experts, forensic experts who can assist with advising on this issue. So I have a very decentralised network
Right.
of individuals who come on board. We do an awful lot of work internationally from our own offices. This is the beauty of modern day, using Skype and Zoom and what have you. And often if we are meeting, then it tends to be in Europe or in New York. But nowadays you don't actually have to have a huge office in a big capital city and spending lots of money on lots of flights everywhere to operate very fast. And indeed, we're far more nimble as a result. But remember this, what I'm doing doesn't fit the normal remit of a charitable activity. What I'm doing is indeed actually very political.
Sure.
Because I'm advocating for a new law, international law. So we don't attract the same level of funding that some of the environmental NGOs will attract, because it doesn't fit into that charitable remit. And because of that, then we have to operate on a very pared down process, if you will. Temperamentally, that suits me, because I'm very nimble and I like to move and be free to move as fast as I can in whichever way demands that, and step into those windows of opportunity. But I'm not particularly interested in building a massive hierarchical organisation to do all of that.
Okay, so I think we've got time for one more question here.
Yeah.
Before Woman's Hour or whatever it is that comes on after us. How do you feel about being part of developing an adult discussion forum stroke symposium that could be a mixture of people of various persuasions, but all looking in the same direction, shall we say, at places like WOMAD and maybe the Arnolfini Gallery or something like that, whereby we can foment a discussion and an opportunity for more people to be involved and debate and perhaps artworks and music related to the environment. Whether you feel as though that would be something worthwhile to do, because I feel lots of people, like Georgia, our filmmaker here, didn't know about ecocide until recently. And how do we get it out there apart from through the kind of channels that we're using up to date? So my feeling is we need a kind of new forum and maybe some kind of sporadic roadshow that actually grabs the attention of people on a ground level, but also kind of maybe the media as well. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the media.
I think the arts are hugely important in all of this, and in taking something forward like a very big idea of ecocide crime. The question is how to decentralise that. I don't need to be involved. Others can run with this in whatever manner of means. If anything, all we want to make sure is everyone is tooled up and skilled up and has the necessary information at their fingertips, if you will. This is definitely one of our challenges, is how to actually have this resourced well enough that allows us to give enough information to the public so that those who are in that creative field can informedly take it forward in a very creative way. And part of that is through using and harnessing the power of social media, film, the arts, and we do see it actually running in different arenas in many different ways. Some countries know an awful lot more about ecocide than others, partly by dint of their political persuasions, partly by dint of the fact that they've done international and national filming and documentaries and so on and so forth. So, just because it's not actually so well known in Britain is partly because of the political persuasions of our recent governments. There's been no reason to engage them, so I haven't bothered. My eye is very firmly in the international arena, not national. However, saying that, there's an awful lot of critical engagement around climate issues now, especially with the climate rebellion, and that's actually kind of fueling a debate that wasn't there previously about what do we need to do about climate issues in the absence of a government taking any leadership on this, in the absence of these big transnational corporations being allowed to continue advancing dangerous industrial activity with impunity. So indeed, any way we can actually leverage communications, of course, greatly assists, and really inviting in individuals and other organisations to run with this in whatever way they see best fit, and acting as a kind of information portal, if you like. The Eradicating Ecocide website is the official information portal on ecocide law, which is a great starting point. Our campaign is really a Kickstarter, crowdfunder, to help fund the small islands that will inevitably take this forward. But again, it's small seeds, if you like. It requires a lot more time and investment and energy. However, we do live in a far more decentralised level of engagement through social media now. So it brings in the possibility for many individuals to engage with this and be creative and make it visible. Because ultimately we're dealing with an abstract idea. So how do we give that visibility? And there's nothing better to do that than through leveraging the world of creative arts. Great.
Right, so there's one more. I think we've got time for one more question here. before Woman's Hour or whatever it is that comes on after us. Um, how do you feel about being part of developing an adult discussion forum stroke symposium that could be a mixture of people of various persuasions, but all looking in the same direction, shall we say, at places like WOMAD and maybe the Arnolfini Gallery or something like that, whereby we can foment a discussion and an opportunity for more people to be involved and debate and perhaps artworks and music related to the environment. Whether you feel as though that would be something worthwhile to do, because I feel lots of people, like Georgia, our filmmaker here, didn't know about Ecocide until recently. And how do we get it out there apart from through the kind of channels that we're using up to date? So my feeling is we need a kind of new forum and maybe some kind of sporadic roadshow that actually grabs the attention of the people on a ground level, but also kind of maybe the media as well. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the media.
I think the arts are hugely important in all of this, and in taking something forward like a very big idea of ecocide crime. I